I normally didn't worry too much when Gary deployed. But in 2010, when Gary left for Afghanistan, I just had this feeling that something might go wrong.
June of 2010, Gary and I were part of an operation which is now known as the Battle of Shawali-Cot. So the basic plan was to fly in the early hours of the morning.
I was the flight lead responsible for planning the mission. I'm going to take off from the airfield and fly to the target that they had given us.
We set off, and visibility was always planned to be almost nil.
My mind is still stuck in Afghanistan in 2010. I have no memory of being on board.
I remember pivoting my body around to look outside the aperture of the aircraft.
I told my co-pilot to bring us down to low level.
And I looked down and I'd seen the ground in front of me, and it was literally right there, you know. It was like, that shouldn't be there. But I only had enough time to really get one word out. Started with F, ended in K, and that's as far as I got. Gary is one of those soldiers that I think that many people try to be like, try to emulate.
So to see someone like Gary cut down in the prime of his life, in the midst of his career as a commando, is really hard to deal with.
When you look at the injuries that Gary sustained, you think it's a miracle that anyone has survived this. It really is.
Gary had a severe traumatic brain injury. It affected him cognitively, physically, and emotionally. A little bit to the right, if anything, but really good. Gary's speech was affected, and it was harder for him to find words.
He couldn't even throw a punch in the early days of his training. And now how far he has come is because of the opportunity that Invictus has created. It's given him that purpose, that meaning. Within the team, we call Gary Mr. Invictus.
What we must remember, and what I think the Invictus Games encapsulates really, really well, is just proving that, you know, that human spirit is incredibly strong, and that if you have the will, then you can really achieve absolutely anything.
The difference that Prince Harry and the Invictus Games had made for my life, I think it has almost saved my life.
When I met Gary, I was 17 years old, and so was he. We were both in year 12. We were both working at the same supermarket, and one of the older ladies that worked there has just asked me, if Gary asked you out, would you say yes? So I was like, yeah, all right. So that's kind of like how it started.
One of the things we had in common, her grandmother was a serving member in the Australian Defence Force, and my grandfather was also a serving member in the Defence Force. And I always had some sort of desire to join the military forces in some shape or form. I was 21 years of age when I decided to join the army. I did 3 tours of East Timor. I was mainly there in a peacekeeping role.
When they first came back from East Timor, everyone was there to greet them.
Soon realise what things you take for granted compared to the families in East Timor.
When Dad was away, we missed him heaps. He'd be gone for months on end. Josh, my brother, definitely wanted to be just like Dad. Anything Dad would do, Josh would follow.
Go, Dad! Go, Dad! Go, Gary!
Sport played a big part in the family life.
Go, Dad!
Dad's always been really into triathlons.
Ooh, go Dad! Yeah, boy!
He was part of the Australian team and then he got everyone else into them as well. So me and my siblings and my mum even did them together.
After spending 11 years in an airborne unit, I applied for Special Forces and I was a sniper team commander for 8 years. My job involved in Afghanistan a lot of reconnaissance work.
This is a vitally important role, relaying critically important information in relation to the battle and the positions and movements of insurgent fighters.
My best mate was Ben Chuck. The very first day I met Ben was on my second deployment to Afghanistan. Straight away, when I met Ben, I thought this is someone that I can work with and easily get along with.
Ben and Gary were very close. They were, you know, the tightest of friends. They were always together. They were very like-minded.
In June 2010, I was involved in probably the fiercest battle of my military career.
The Battle of Shah Wali Kot is the most significant battle in Australia's military history for the last 50 years. The objective was to strike a significant blow against one of the most dangerous hotspots for enemy activity in Afghanistan at that time.
The conditions there were quite horrendous. It was 50-degree plus temperatures, no shade at all. It was just a rocky outcrop we're sitting on. It was really very, very hard and tense.
It was close quarters fighting. Miraculously, there were no commandos killed.
After 5 or 6 days, we managed to push the Taliban out of the area and secure and neutralise any threat within that area. We had one more operation to carry out before returning home.
We set off. Gary was sitting in the centre of the front seat with Ben sitting on his left. There was no moon for that particular night.
Even with the night vision goggles, you can't see a whole lot. It's kind of like if you go into a closet in the middle of your house at night, you close the door, it's kind of that kind of dark.
3 minutes out, whatever height you're flying at, you want to reduce that down to about 50 feet off the ground.
So I remember telling my co-pilot to start our descent to low level. I remember looking at the map and reaching over for the radio switch. That's apparently when we impacted.
This was an experience beyond the comprehension of any one of us. You're travelling at close to 300 kilometres an hour. You've got a helicopter that's 5 times the weight of a standard car, rotor blades, immense rotational forces involved in the crash.
I arrived on the scene at the accident within 2 minutes of the helicopter impacting. I went to the wreckage and began pulling bodies, fellow commandos, out of the hull of the Black Hawk. The immediate area was on fire and bullets were flying out in 360 degrees. Amidst the fire and the bullets, I knew that Gary was somewhere in that wreckage.
I've just come home from picking the kids up from school and there was a knock at the door. There was 3 uniformed army and a padre. So I let them in, of course, but I knew that this wasn't going to bring good news.
Another 3 soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan. 7 other Special Forces troops were also on board. Some of them are seriously wounded.
Gary was in a very serious condition. He had a machine that was breathing for him.
It was hard. It was shocking when you'd see him because he just was out of it, cords everywhere, and it was really hard to look at first.
From top to bottom, there was something injured all over him. I was told that Gary had a traumatic brain injury. He had a lot of internal injuries. His spleen was bleeding and removed. His left leg was badly broken and missing quite a few inches of bone.
See ya.
Bye.
Okay.
Love you.
Bye.
The pain for me was constant, so that was my biggest memory, is just the pain and emotional pain going along with that.
Pete Rudland was in the ICU as well.
I pretty much damaged every major bone in my body except my left arm.
I knew there was other guys in the hospital from the accident that were in my team, and there was guys that weren't there. And I thought, where's Ben? Where's Ben? And they said, no, Ben's died. Ben died from the crash. Because I'd forget within minutes, I'd be constantly asking for him. So it took a long time for me to come to that realisation that he wasn't there anymore. And I just thought, my mates are no longer with me. Why did I survive and they didn't? And that's obviously, I could feel myself thinking, I'd rather die than be here.
Australia lost 3 of the best, being Chuck, Scott Palmer and Tim Applin.
I definitely used to sit at home and think, how did this happen? Why did it happen? So I sort of had that constant question in the back of my mind.
There was an inquiry held into the crash itself. So the outcomes, long story short, pilot error.
The success or failure of the mission is my fault, and obviously we failed pretty badly, and so that comes down to me. It's just miscommunication. It's what happens when it's dark out, so it comes down to pilot error. Unfortunately, I dropped the ball somewhere. Not a day goes by I don't think about the guys that were in the back that lost their lives, and then all the guys that have been, life-altering injuries. I think about the families, and it's every day.
Things happen. Nothing ever goes perfectly. Unfortunately, in this case, it's a catastrophic event, but it's still, things happen.
I have nothing against Trevor and the other pilot that was in the aircraft, so at all. But it was just a freak accident. That's what it all was. After 2 months in ICU, I was moved to Mount Wilga Hospital in Hornsby.
Probably still got your indent.
Yeah.
When Gary arrived, I walked into his room and I said, hi Gary, my name's Kelly Gerard.
A lot of pain and anxiety from this.
Yeah. A lot of hours on that table. And he just said, oh, hi, nice to meet you, and said, oh, can you just pass my sneakers, and we'll go for a run. He didn't understand any of the injuries that he actually had. From the brain injury, it obviously affected his memory quite significantly.
I remember the time she'd sit me in my wheelchair with a table in front of me, and there'd be a series of nuts and bolts, and I didn't have the coordination or the ability to screw a nut into a simple bolt. It was very hard. I mean, my whole military career I was in charge of something or someone. Having that taken away from you in a split second and then thrown back in the bottom of the barrel was hard to stomach.
Katrina never left Gary's side. She was here every single day without fail. She was always there trying to motivate him, trying to keep him calm when he was getting stressed. initially. There was a lot of agitation and aggression from the brain damage. That's going to wear you down. But she had to be there for Gary. She wanted to be there for Gary.
I was a soldier for 28 years. I've seen a lot of people get injured, you know, some of them catastrophically injured, and a lot of their partners to walk away. You know, the worse the injury, the quicker they left. She did everything for him. She was amazing. One of my friends and I, we have a joke that everybody should have a Katrina.
That was easy.
The doctors tried numerous different procedures to get Gary's leg to mend.
You worked for that, didn't you?
But he was getting infections with all the metalwork that was put in.
About a year after the accident, they decided to amputate my left leg. I felt very emotional because I tried so hard for so long to save it.
He came back a few days later, just totally different look.
His whole body just all of a sudden was not fighting infection. It was just like he just became healthier, and you knew that it was the best decision.
Hardest thing is when the left leg goes forward to try and judge the distance.
Yeah, that's right.
It goes too far forward.
Yes, you've got to learn.
The biggest chance for me learning to walk again was the balance and coordination.
Yeah, come on. Seeing Gary walk for the first time was incredible. You know, even though he had to concentrate so hard to do it, he still had this smile plastered on his face. Yeah, just so proud of what he'd achieved.
So cool! I can't believe it feels like he's going fast.
After 2 years in hospital, they spoke to me and said, look, it's time for you to go home and try a new rehabilitation system closer to home.
Gary, he didn't really cope with being home. He found that there wasn't really much he could do, and he got frustrated with having to rely on me to do stuff for him.
I was breaking TVs and punching walls and punching windscreens of cars and smashing windscreens. And that was pretty fearful for Katrina, seeing her husband sitting next to her, punching a windscreen of the car and smashing it.
The invisible injuries, the mental health injuries, they're invisible to us. We don't understand it. What we don't understand scares us. Just the way that you are, your whole personality can sometimes change for a period of time or for the rest of your life. But you never have anything to show from it. So you're constantly having to explain to somebody why, when there's a loud bang or an aeroplane or a helicopter flying over you, that might trigger something. So for a lot of guys, post-traumatic stress is a big issue.
It was tense at home, but I knew that this wasn't Gary at his normal state, and this was, you know, the brain injury, and he just needed help.
The accident itself, playing a lot on Gary's mind. People had put together parts of the accident for him because he had no memory of it, and it was a traumatic memory that he had. Gary started to talk more and more and more about wanting to get back on a Black Hawk and, I guess, re-experience something that had been very traumatic for him, but in a positive way.
It took a long time for me to get close enough to actually physically touch one, let alone be on board one. I had to go through processes of getting physically and emotionally ready to board an aircraft. Normally I've got a team of guys around me, so being there alone and all those memories of them being there was very tough.
He got to the stage where he really wanted to go for a flight. So they put steps in place for actually taking Gary and also his family.
Flying over Sydney Harbour, I was more happy looking at the eyes of Katrina and the kids. That was where I got my enjoyment from.
The ride was a really big turning point for Gary, but he was still lacking some drive and being able to set goals.
So we, as a team, came up with an idea that we thought might work for Gary in finding that sort of drive and that motivation.
Looked like there were lots of sports that you'd been interested in before that...
Katrina called me into her office and said, look, how would you like to apply for the Invictus Games? And I said, what? What's the Invictus Games? She said, it's a game event run by Prince Harry. And I had no idea what it was. I hadn't heard of it.
It all happened very quickly from when we heard about the games, and then the next day we were packing for the games.
Over the past 8 years, I've witnessed the whole cycle of life-changing injury.
The Invictus Games came about from 2007-2008. I flew back from Afghanistan early, and on that same plane were 3 critically injured soldiers, all UK guys, and the coffin of a Danish soldier underneath as well. And that hit me quite hard to see the injuries that these guys had sustained, and also that war has ultimately has its price. Then a few years later, I ended up going to the Warrior Games in America. 300 competitors using sport as part of their recovery. And there was no media, very few families, it was just them. But I could see on their face the impact that sport was having. So there and then, the Invictus Games was kind of half stolen off the Americans and said, well, what they've done here is absolutely amazing. What if we could do this internationally? Let's recover together. And not just the individuals themselves, but also the families. So within 9 months, we created the Invictus Games.
Welcome to the Games. Welcome to Invictus.
Meeting Prince Harry for the very first time, I still can remember that day. I just thought, well, why am I here? How'd I get here?
When you first met him, you do feel starstruck, but once he starts talking, you're kind of like, oh, he's just like everyone else.
When I first arrived for the games, I had no idea what I was getting myself in for. The archery didn't do too well. It was very tough. And in cycling, I came third last. So I wasn't too competitive.
So 50 metres freestyle.
But I was fortunate to win a silver medal in the 50 metres freestyle.
Representing Australia, Gary Robinson.
For me, competing was something I needed, and the old Gary was still there. So being around these other athletes, for me, gave me that sense of belonging again. I remember watching people on a sporting track with guys with no arms or no arm and no leg, and just seeing what they can do. They may have come last, but the expression on their faces and the emotion that they're spilling out on the track, you can't get that anywhere else.
We've had people, sending in emails, thousands of civilians who have broken backs, who have, broken collarbones, whatever it is, something that has put them on their sofa for a period of weeks or months. And they've written in saying, thank you, I've just watched somebody who should be dead run the 100 metres. And that has given me a whole new lease of life.
He really was a changed person after that first Invictus. I was here the day he walked into the health centre, and he had his Invictus gear on, and he was wearing one of his medals, and he had no crutches, no wheelchair, and you could just see that he was confident.
It wasn't long until they announced that the next Invictus Games would be in Orlando.
Message.
Yeah, from Michelle. Let's have a look.
Hey, Prince Harry. Remember when you told us to bring it at the Invictus Games?
Careful what you wish for.
Boom.
Oh, really? Please.
Boom.
I put my application form in and I made sure Pete was along with me.
Initially, we weren't competitive, you know, like we went there, we were like the token guys, you know, turning up. We went, we rode, we didn't do very well at all, but we liked it.
We've met Prince Harry now a few times over the last few years, and I thought I need to write a letter to him just to thank him. And I thought to myself, if I get the opportunity to give it to him, I'll give it to him. I was lucky enough, I was just standing there and I just said to him, oh, look, I've got a letter for you. I don't know if you want it. And then he's like, yeah, give it to me. So that was nice just to be able to thank him and have it all down in writing, the difference that he's made to our lives. Through the Invictus Games, Gary has become a little bit known.
And here, of course, in person, as well as on the banners in front of the memorial, behind me is Gary Robinson.
Recently, they had an event down in Canberra and there was a banner that was put up at the Australian War Memorial.
100 days out from Invictus, we have Gary Robinson, the commando. We have Gary Robinson, the Invictus athlete. Unconquered.
It was an extremely emotional event for all of us to have him and Katrina there in front of the War Memorial. Wonderful stuff.
I think for me, I've been to all past 3 Invictus Games where...
We created the Invictus Games with a lot of help and a lot of support, and the British public absolutely loved it in 2014, and now it's grown on to Sydney in 2018.
And if there was one message that you wanted to communicate to the rest of the country, what would that be?
Game on down under. It will be game on down under. The last 12 months for me has been the best 12 months I have in my life. The recovery that I've been through to the announcement of my 2 daughters being pregnant, and my son, who's now joined the army, is following his father's footsteps.
It's been nearly 8 years since the crash now. You know, it's been a real roller coaster for his family, and it's also been the perfect example of, you know, a family that sticks together and works at it can achieve amazing things.
Another baby? Now I've got a good one.
Once I wish I had died in the accident with the injuries that I had, but now today, after what I've been through and what I've been involved in, I am glad I am here and still alive.
That's amazing.
The thing I'm looking forward to the most is meeting my new grandchildren and to be with my kids and seeing them have kids and seeing my family grow into what it is today. I'm still here for a reason. That's why. Always try your hardest, whether it's schooling, whether it's sports you play, just the way you live your life. Always try to be the best you can be.